Great, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. It is December 10th, 2020, 7:30 in the morning, and this is the virtual meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Before we call the meeting to order, again, I want to welcome everybody to the HRA meeting. This meeting is being held electronically, as we all know, to comply with the governor's Safer at Home order, and also to ensure the safety of all residents and staff that would otherwise want to participate in these meetings live. So all members of the HRA, the staff, and the presenters are participating either from their homes or their offices. And then before we begin, there's a few things that we need to cover. Today, community comment will be the only opportunity for people to call in to provide comment via phone. And remember, when you do call in, you'll be allowed to comment on anything that is not on the agenda today or not scheduled for a future public hearing. So if it's a matter that's on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing, you will not be able to comment on it. You'll have 3 minutes. Liz Olson, one of our administrative support specialists, is going to be the timer, and she'll let you know when you get to your 3-minute mark and need to wrap up your comments. Well, we want to avoid redundancy, but certainly call in if you have comments, new comments you want to make, or information you want to make aware, you want the HRA to be aware of. So thanks in advance for your patience as we work through these meetings online using different forms of technology, and many people participating, as I mentioned earlier, from their own homes. We hope there won't be any issues, but to the extent that there are, we'll try to solve them as quickly as we can with our very capable IT department. So when you call in to participate in community comment, call 800-374-0221. 800-374-0221. The conference ID number is 740-9406. 740-9406. Give the operator your name, your street address, and your phone number, and then press star 1 on your telephone keypad if you would like to get in the queue to speak. A city staff member will introduce you when it becomes your turn to speak. So let's call the meeting to order, and roll call, please, Ms. Olson.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Brindle.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Mayor Hovland.
Here. Next matter is the Pledge of Allegiance. I will rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've got a form of meeting agenda in front of us today. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the meeting agenda on the HRA or the executive director?
No modifications from staff, sir.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as shown from one of the commissioners?
So moved.
Commissioner Brindle moves. Commissioner Fisher seconds. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to approval of the meeting agenda.
Commissioner Anderson.
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle.
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher.
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The form of meeting agenda is approved. Next, we're going to go on to community comment. Again, that number, if you're interested in talking to the HRA about an issue that's not on the agenda today, it won't be on a future public hearing. Please call in 800-374-0221. Conference ID 740-9406. We need your name, your home address, and your phone number, and then press star 1 to get into the queue. Ms. Olson, do we have anybody queued up, or is Director Benarott handling that this morning?
Good morning, Chair Hovland, members of the commission. We have no callers at this point. We have put messages on viewer screens and on Facebook. Because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait a minute before moving on with the agenda. My clock shows that it's 7:36, so I will let you know when we have a caller, or 7:37, whichever comes first.
Very good. Thank you, Director Benarott.
now 7:37, and we have no callers, so I think you may move on with your agenda.
All right, thank you. Next portion of the agenda is the consent agenda. There are 5 items on the consent agenda. Is there any commissioner that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
We got Commissioner Brindle moving, Commissioner Fisher seconding again. Roll call, please, with respect to the consent agenda.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The commissioner or the consent agenda items are approved by all the commissioners and the chair. And then we are going to move on to reports and recommendations portion of the agenda, and we've got some things that we're going to cover here this morning. The first matter is the Housing Strategy Task Force report, and I don't know who might be introducing that. I know we're going to have Steve Brown and Dan Hunt make that presentation. Ms. Hawkinson, did you have any preliminary comments, or anybody else have preliminary comments before we move into the report from Mr. Brown and Mr. Hunt?
I don't have any formal comments, Chair. I do want to, publicly thank the task force for their last 18 months and 45 meetings, plus countless emails of work to create this. And today, the co-chair, Mr. Hunt, and a member, Mr. Brown, will be presenting. The other co-chair, Bernadette Horning, is out ill today. Otherwise, she would be here. So I will hand it over to them.
All right. Mr. Hunt or Mr. Brown, we'll let you determine who's going first. I'm sure you've got this worked out.
Fabulous, Mayor. Thank you. Good morning, members of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and thank you for this opportunity to present our report and answer any questions. Although we all wish Bernadette could be here today, the more than capable Steve Brown is taking her place. Before we give you an overview, we'd like to recognize the members of the task force, city staff, and our consultants. In addition to Steve, myself, and Bernadette, Janet Coutu, Joe Burke, Norm Siekman, Thomas Kuhn, and for the first 6 months of the task force, Rosa Maida was on the task force. City staff was Stephanie Hawkinson, MJ Lamont, Scott Neal, and Kerry Teague, and our consultant team was Mary Clapp Smith, Antonia Rosel, and Janie Philbrand. This report is the culmination of many spirited debates among the task force members who, to put it mildly, held widely disparate views on many of the topics we discussed. Steve?
We have the slides on a share screen somewhere. I see Stephanie talking, but I think she's on mute.
My apologies. I will get those up for you.
So we should be on the third slide, the executive summary.
All right, they're up on the screen, Mr. Brown, and we're on the executive summary page, so I hope you can also see it on your screen.
I can. So we feel strongly that the city is healthy and thriving, and that any and all recommendations in this report, regardless of the severity or the seemingly intractability of the problem, must keep that in mind. That said, housing is changing in Edina. The single-family stock has improved dramatically by teardowns and rehabs. The multifamily stock has grown significantly and appears on course to continue that pace or to increase it. The task force took a balanced approach, largely preserving R1 zoning and single-family homes while recognizing the need for more multifamily housing production to accomplish the growth identified in the comprehensive plan. This report was developed during the COVID-19 pandemic which limited the task force's ability to collect community input. Also, it was developed during the social unrest resulting from the killing of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police, which may result in more resource allocation to address racial disparities. Dan?
Next slide, please. Edina is a model of a successful, mature, progressive urban community because of the following traits: good schools, stable housing, proximity to jobs, accessible parks, mix of local retail and services, and established neighborhoods. Each of these factors complements the others in a virtuous cycle. Edina is fortunate to have these elements in place and has benefited economically from rising land values and a strong tax base. We are proud of these traits and intend to make them stronger. The quality of life surveys conducted every other year by the city of Edina have overall indicated that the residents of Edina believe that Edina is a good to excellent place to live. The quality of life survey also asks about people's concerns, such as, all in all, do you think things in Edina are generally headed in the right direction, or do you feel things are on the wrong track? In 2019, 66% or 2/3 said headed in the right direction. However, between 2017 and 2019, those who answered the wrong track increased from 22 to 29%. Of those residents, 49% said that one of the primary concerns was poor development, overbuilding, density of the city, which has increased from 26% in 2017. The task force recommends that the concerns related to poor development, overall building, density of the city be investigated with new questions in the 2021 City of Edina Quality of Life Survey. One of Edina's strengths is that it has always established a wide variety of housing options and a wide distribution of housing types. Future planning should continue to accommodate the diverse housing in Edina.
Next slide, please, Stephanie. So the task force developed 4 goals supported by more than 40 different strategies. The goals are to promote life cycle housing. The second goal is to amend land use regulations to enable more diverse housing mix. Goal number 3 is to reduce building costs. And the fourth goal was to encourage sustainable design and technology in all new and substantial rehabilitation housing.
Next slide. The task force recommends changes in zoning and regulation that will lead to lower development costs and more affordable missing middle and special needs housing in the areas of the city guided for higher development. The task force recommends 5 priorities for the provision of new housing in Edina, based on Edina City Council's approved housing numbers in the 2040 Comprehensive Plan and further informed by the Maxfield Housing Market Study. The task force recommends the following next steps for City Council. Solicit additional input via the Quality of Life Survey, as noted earlier. Evaluate the impact of the increased population and housing growth rate by housing type on all areas of the city. Use the 5 priorities to evaluate new housing proposals when considering additional developments and growth. Evaluate and streamline the current approval process for housing development. Recognize that to achieve the affordable housing goal of 992 units in the next decade, after having only built 98 of the 212 unit goal in the past 10 years, the council and city staff must redouble their current laudable effort and provide the needed financial support and political leadership.
Next slide, please. So HRA members, we thank you for your time. We also want to join many others in thanking members Mary Brindle and Mike Fisher for their years of service. We also want to thank Stephanie Hawkinson for her tremendous support for the task force. And with that, we'd like to turn it over to you for your questions and comments.
Questions or comments for Mr. Brown or Mr. Hunt from commissioners at this point in time? Commissioner Sutton?
So I just want to take a minute to thank again the task force members. It was an incredible amount of work that produced a terrific report. It's very comprehensive and enlightening, and I know that it wasn't an easy lift. There was lots of spirited discussion, and that's the way we get to the right answers in our community, is we take people with different perspectives and we get together and try to figure out how to solve a problem. I don't know that there's really a problem here, but there is a future waiting for us, and we need to think about how we're going to approach it. And I was really pleased to see the work. And I just want to thank all of you for your tremendous, tireless work on this topic.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Staunton. Other commissioners have questions? Commissioner Anderson?
Good morning. I don't have a question as such, but I would like to follow up Commissioner Staunton's comments in saying that it's to me been quite amazing to watch the length of time and the level of dedication that the whole task force brought to this. There's a topic of conversation, continues to be throughout the community, and I think it's very significant. I also think that your report presents focus, and focus is what's required in order to begin to implement change and to create the community that we all look forward to living in. So I just want to thank you again. It's a very significant body of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brindle?
Thank you. So I went through the information provided. At one point, there's a map of on page 30 of the task force report. There's a map of locations where covenants had been or still there, areas that had or still have racial covenants. If we still have racial covenants in parts of our city, how do we get at removing those? I don't understand the process of, I guess maybe that's an answer that we don't have this morning, but I think it's vital that if we have racial covenants today that control who can and cannot reside in an area, that be addressed.
Chair.
Oh, good.
Oh. Okay. Chair, commissioners, I know other cities, Golden Valley in particular, is taking a lead on making a path forward for residents to have the covenants removed from their, or not removed, because we don't want to negate history, but have them nullified on their records of their home. They're clearly illegal to enforce these days, but they do still exist on property records. And so there is a movement, and I know the HRRC has been looking at that. So we don't have a prescribed path forward unless the city attorney would like to opine on this.
Yes, Commissioner Brindle. So I've been following this issue. There is a process for removing those covenants from the title, and we can, if that identifies any titles that have those covenants, we can assist the city with getting them removed. They are unenforceable right now.
Okay.
No one could actually attempt enforcement of that language, but it's still, important to have them removed when necessary. So we can assist the city with doing that.
Okay, thank you. I also noticed in the response from the Edina Housing Foundation that they don't support the missing middle recommendation. And I think, that just shouted at me. And they state that it's because of the high land cost in Edina that they don't support that recommendation. So while I think we as a council and as an HRA, but also in the comprehensive plan going forward, we embrace missing middle housing. And if our land costs make missing middle housing impossible or difficult or too expensive, then I think maybe some strategies could be thought of to address how that land can be acquired for missing middle in order to provide that housing. Because I think it's essential. We're seeing lots of rental, and sorry, I just had to write something down so I don't forget it. We're seeing lots of rental, but what we're not seeing is multi-housing for sale, and I think that's a gap. And so maybe it is land cost that precludes that. I don't know, but because I know that the laws and statutes that made that difficult, my understanding is they've been changed. So I guess I'd like to know from a builder's perspective, why is it that well, I can answer my own question. If they're going to build a building that's for sale, they have to sell 65% of the units before they can put the shovel in the ground. So that probably is why they choose to go rental in the first place. But nonetheless, the point of my comment is to strategize on making land more available somehow for missing middle. And then lowering the cost of housing, building housing. I would not want to see us compromise on materials. I don't see anywhere in there that we would enter into a deal, if you will, on the cost of the land. What I see is the cost of building, and I don't want to see us compromise on building materials. Edina has, I mean, look at 71 France. We as a city council, when we talk about a development, we go way beyond, really way beyond our purview when we critique a development, to the point of saying we want to see more stone and less metal. You know, no metal panels. We actually critique the architecture, which we're kind of out. I think we're kind of out in an area by ourselves a bit in doing that, because the architect is proposing something that they feel is artistic, fits the area, pushes the envelope architecturally, and we like to keep things a little more timeless and classic, and we meaning probably me. But as far as lowering the cost of building, while I understand that it is one of the costs that possibly could be more controllable than others, I would worry about the quality of the resulting development. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Brindle. Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would also like to thank the group that worked on this. You know, I was a little nervous when I read the staff report, because I was bracing for a report that was based on a group of people that couldn't come to agreement. because it was sort of emphasizing the fact that you came from different places and different thought patterns about this topic, and that was intentional. You know, we tried to really bring all opinions to the table, knowing that that would be a really tough task when people come to the table thinking different things and different approaches. And I was actually pretty pleased when I read the report. It doesn't read that way. It's just a very thoughtful, well assembled report that has some very clear goals. And so kudos to all of you for finding a way to do that. Now, I don't know how difficult that was to get there, but it really struck me the description of, I guess I would describe it as a rock, paper, scissors approach to your votes, or you're trying to come to agreement, like where you had sort of a scoring system that I can only imagine you're all doing that at the same time and I imagine that probably didn't happen the first meeting, right? That had to come about as a way to kind of figure out how you could move the ball forward. And so I appreciate how hard that might have been. And to get to a point where I hope you can all feel that this represents part of your thinking and part of your approach. I would just say the comments that when I read the reflections from the HRRC and the chair and the Housing Foundation, it was interesting because when I read through the report, one sentence popped out at me that didn't seem in the spirit of the whole report, that it felt like it was almost inserted. And that was the sentence on page 31 where it says, "It is a matter of personal opinion." And to me, it was just a sentence that, I mean, our whole city is everywhere is based on personal opinion. It felt like an unnecessary sentence in the whole report. It's commented on by the chair of the HRRC. I don't know the protocol. Do you just keep the sentence in and there's an opinion about it, or is it an unnecessary sentence? I could go either way on it. But other than that, literally the whole report is just it's really good. And the whole comment about the missing middle, I'm not quite sure why the Housing Foundation doesn't feel like that is in should be or part of it. To me, the missing middle, and you actually stated in the report, the missing middle is kind of what you fit in the seams, right? It's not, you don't go out and take a new development site that could be a higher density opportunity and lower the density to missing middle necessarily. But there are those edge sites where you want to, from single family into more of a higher density that might be those opportunities. And so I don't necessarily see it as a down zoning or downsizing. It's kind of a right sizing in some way. So we might not know today what those exact spots are, but hopefully that we keep our eyes open for those opportunities. So anyway, without saying much more, I think I know how difficult this might have been for all of you to come to this point. I think you did a really great job of getting to a point where you have some clarity and a really solid report. So thank you all for taking that on and for making that happen.
Commissioner Fisher, can you the comment about the personal opinion? I don't know what you're referring to. Can you put some more context in it? Can you read what's around it?
Sure. Let me just bring it up here. So on page 31, at the very top of the page, and it's actually coming off of the page that Commissioner Brindle was referring to, where there's the map of the racial covenants recorded. And you get to the next page right at the top. I'll just read the whole paragraph. Understanding the history of exclusionary housing policy helps people recognize housing regulations that may reinforce patterns of income exclusion. And then this is the sentence, where I think you could just stop right there. But this sentence was added. It is a matter of personal opinion whether active zoning measures should be taken to reduce the income segregation created by past housing policies. I don't know if it's a personal opinion, a policy opinion, or what kind of opinion. It's just, to me, it doesn't help, or it just doesn't do anything, and I'm not sure it's necessary. But I have no idea how much work went into try to craft something that people felt comfortable with. So
Obviously, there were different views on that issue, and I can't remember the exact conversation. When I'm done speaking, maybe Steve can add some more to it. But it was an attempt. I think it was an attempt to come up with some language that was acceptable to all 7 members. Personal opinion, probably that phrase is misspoken, but the sentence speaks to the fact that we couldn't reach agreement.
yeah, and that was kind of my assumption. And I think sometimes when you use words like "it's a matter of personal opinion" in a report like this, it like jumps off the page and grabs you in a way. And maybe that's good. Maybe that shows the challenge of trying to get people to come to an agreement. But for me, it literally jumped off the page. And then I read the HRRC chair's comments. And I'm like, well, it wasn't just me. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's maybe the way it's covered with the appendix, and it's clear to a reader that there were some challenges in that area. That might be just fine. I'm open to how others want to deal with that. But honestly, when I know how hard it was for this group to kind of put something on paper that you can all live with, and we're talking about one sentence, that's pretty remarkable, actually. And I do want to respect the folks on the committee that maybe felt really strongly about that sentence. I don't want to be censoring sort of what you all did either. So that's why I'm really open to how you want to resolve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Staunton.
Before you chime in, you mind if I just respond on a couple of those points?
Please.
So I think the way to manage these issues is what we've done. I'm quite pleased that the appendix includes the comments from the HRRC and from the Housing Foundation, and I think that's the way to leave it. And then with respect to Member Brindle's comments, or Commissioner Brindle's comments, I think that's an illustration of the conversations that this report is going to spark. I think one of the things that I take this report to be saying is we can reduce the costs of building by having less and know it when you see it standard, and more of a definite standard about what developers need to meet in order to get a successful application through us. And I think we've had a tradition, you accurately kind of summarize, of kind of deciding on the fly what we want to do on these things. And I think it's important that we be clear about these requirements so that people know the mark they're shooting at. So those are a couple of comments with respect to my colleagues' remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll tag along on that last comment from Commissioner Staunton. Goal number 3, reducing building costs. I was really interested in hearing a little bit more around what you thought were the potential major drivers there in reducing building costs. Because I might have a heightened level of sensitivity to this issue right now, because the cities that we are part of, the Municipal Legislative Commission, we're having quite a debate right now with the Builders Association, and I think I had to miss our Rotary meeting this week, but I think we had a speaker from the Builders Association talking about the challenges cities were creating in their permitting costs and other costs that were driving up the cost of housing and causing them to be less able to deliver affordable product. We don't agree with their analysis. We think that's a red herring on their part, to be frank about it. And so when I see something about driving down building costs, I'm curious as to what you think the main drivers of that could potentially be. And then before you answer that question, I'll agree with Commissioner Staunton. I think the way to handle this is the way we've done it in the past, is to not necessarily adopt the report, but receive the report. And then staff is suggesting that they create an implementation plan that we can have debate on at both the HRA level and the council level. And I think that's the right way to go about this. That's what we've done before with other reports. So let's go back now to this building cost issue, and I want to hear a little bit more about that so I understand it better from the.
Mr. Chair, before you do that, I just want to be clear. I'm not in favor of just receiving the report. I'm in favor of adopting the report. So,
all right, the recommended action is receiving the report. So we'll have that discussion momentarily.
Okay. To address Commissioner Hovland's question, so two things. One, there's building costs and there's land costs, and then the representative of the builders who talked to Rotary was talking about land cost in this Rotary yesterday or Tuesday. The building cost, I think it's fair, and Steve can chime in here. It's just a cautionary comment. Obviously, it's easy for costs to pile up. It's easy for councils to, want something here, want something there. So it's not like we had a list of things we thought were driving up the cost. They were just conversations with builders and developers. The city has high standards. They're well grounded why they have them, and but you can't have everything. The higher your standards are, and there may be great reasons for them, the less affordability you have. It's just a trade-off. So it wasn't like the task force was saying we can see multiple items here that are driving up costs unnecessarily. It was more the task force saying we just urge you to be careful when you say we want more brick, less steel, because it incrementally makes things less affordable.
All right, thank you for that.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Fisher?
I just want to add on to what Mr. Hunt just said, because he's absolutely right. I mean, and I think it's good as a cautionary tale in a report like this to just remind people that everything you ask for has a price tag. And as an HRA, we've dealt with this a little bit. If you think about the Aon development, I mean, that's not your just typical affordable housing. I mean, there's underground parking. There's a lot of features to that you might not see in typical affordable housing. And we helped finance that to help sort of elevate it maybe to a level that maybe some other developments might not get to. And that's just something we have to be aware of, that as policymakers in the future, what is that standard we want to have? How much can we help subsidize? So if we were just asking a developer just on their own to cover all of that, it would have been very difficult and still hit a price point. So it's going to continue to be a question: how much do we want to participate in that? And we already have. You've seen the connection with a lot of our affordable housing units and TIF, and it's because the developers are trying to find that cost balance, and we're just going to have to be really aware of that, how much we're asking for, and what the policies are going to be to help get there on those cost items.
Thank you. I'll be remiss if I didn't join my colleagues in thanking everybody. 45 meetings over 18 months is really an extraordinary effort. I think you should all give yourselves a big holiday hug for the job well done. It was really quite a Herculean effort. I think Commissioner Fisher touched on something that was really important too, I think, and that is how we populated this task force was what drove in part the differing views on things. And I think that was really important, because we see that in the work we do at the council, that these disparate opinions from folks in our community and on our council itself or in the HRA help you get a complete set of facts from which you can then try to find us some pathways and some solutions and make some decisions that are appropriate. So thanks for a job extraordinarily well done, I would say. Other commissioner comments at this point in time? Otherwise, we need to think about, and Member Staunton touched on this, and I think it was a good way to get to this issue. The recommended course of action from staff is that there be a motion to receive the report and direct city staff to create an implementation plan. Commissioner Staunton is saying we should actually adopt the report. And then he didn't make a comment about directing city staff. Executive Director Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had at the staff level a discussion. We have an ongoing discussion about the verb, right, of what we're asking you to do when we have these kinds of reports that come to you. Do we want you to receive it, acknowledge it, approve it, adopt it? When we've looked back on our practices for previous reports like this, we have really found an inconsistency in the use of that verb. So we don't have a particular meaning attached to any one of those particular actions, but we do want you to know that the result of whatever action you're going to take here is the same. We've tried to set this up in terms of going forward as close as we could to the Race and Equity Task Force, and that produced a report like this that staff then developed a work plan around that we brought back to the council or the HRA in this case, and we move it forward like that. So that's sort of the procedure that we think we want it to move forward with going in the future. But in terms of the verb, I'm not sure if I can provide you any more advice than that.
All right. Well, good. That alone was helpful. I think that you're not making an internal distinction between use of the different verbs described. So, Commissioner Staunton, maybe you'd want to lead out with a motion, and then we'll go from there.
So I'd make a motion that we adopt the report from the Housing Task Force and direct staff to bring back to work on an implementation plan that can be brought back to us at a later date.
All right. All right. We've got a second from Commissioner Fisher. Now a discussion. Okay. Further discussion? All right. We'll need a roll call on this, Ms. Olson. With respect to the motion to adopt the report of the Housing Task Force and direct city staff to create an implementation plan therefrom.
Commissioner Anderson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle?
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher? Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Staunton?
Aye.
Mayor Hovland?
Aye. The motion is approved. Again, thank you for that incredible amount of work and effort on behalf of your community. Following that Maxfield report, this is really going to be helpful to the council and the HRA on a going forward basis. So I don't know if any other commissioners, we have other, not commissioners, but we have other task force members with us this morning. I don't know if they'd want to make a quick comment or not as we wrap this matter up. That's the other faces on the screen. Thank you. Thank you for your service to your community. We really genuinely appreciate this work that was done. It was a very, very good work product. So, all right, Commissioner or Ms. Hawkinson, we'll move on to the Affordable Housing Policy Compliance Report.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. And once again, if I may share my screen.
And all you task force members, you're welcome to stay with us or whatever your schedule permits.
Thank you for having me present this report today. We hired Affordable Housing Connections a couple years ago to work with are property owners that have affordable units within their market rate developments. So our understanding of the affordable housing policy is the primary purpose is to provide housing in Edina that is affordable to low and moderate income households. So the purpose of compliance then is to confirm and verify that developments that were to have affordable housing units have them and that these units are serving the intended population. And to make sure that that the properties are adhering to the affordable housing policy. So Affordable Housing Connections was retained as a third-party consultant to do these reviews. We met with managers. I met with them, with all the property managers in 2019, and at that point we discussed what the expectations were for the affordable units. They met again with all the property owners in early 2020 to go over all the paperwork to verify compliance and to have very in-depth meetings to review. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork with affordable housing that is not required with market rate, and so managing them is quite different. And then they were available throughout the year with phone calls and emails to answer any questions that the property managers had. They reviewed all the tenant files for the affordable housing to check on incomes and rents to make sure the population served was, in fact, needing of the affordable housing and to make sure that the rents complied. And then we talked regularly. So with income, to confirm income, what was looked at were wages, entitlement benefits, and income off of assets. And assets are trusts, investments. I mean, there's a whole slew of items that are considered assets. And the idea was to make sure that someone may be have a low income, low wages, but they may be getting a lot of money off of their assets. And so we wanted to make sure that the affordable housing units were, again, serving those who needed affordable housing based on the criteria that was set forth. And when the policy was designed, we talked about 50% and 60% of area median income. And so there's these, in the affordable housing world, there's these charts that are published by HUD every year, and Novogradac and Minnesota Housing all publish them. And so there's this common understanding of what all that means. And so that was one litmus test. The other then was rent. And that the rents needed to be at affordable levels. So, but the rent limit includes not just the rent, but utilities. So if the owner is paying the utilities, then the rent can be at the rent cap. But if the tenant is paying utilities, that's an extra cost to them. So the formula is rent plus utilities plus any other mandatory expenses all have to be at or below the cap rent level. So here are the results. It was pretty much a 2-year process to get to this point, although moving forward, we hope that the plan is to give a report every year. Right now, there are 4 buildings that were being evaluated because they were fully leased up. We know that the Lorient the construction has been completed, but it wasn't fully leased up during the time that we were doing this review, so they will appear on next year's report. Another thing that we learned through this process is the city, we have evolved with our agreements with the developers. There was an understanding amongst staff when the policy was drafted and when these agreements with the developers were that there was a common language for what affordable meant. Well, this is why I think government gets accused of bureaucracy, is because there isn't necessarily a common understanding, or there are those who want to tweak that understanding. And so then you write more and more restrictions and definitions of what it all means. And after these developments came in, had agreements, we have to develop that 50-page policy guide of instructions of how it is that you meet these requirements. And it's 50 pages of instructions. Well, that wasn't written when these development agreements were approved. So there may have been a little bit more of a leeway in how they understood what affordable meant. Nonetheless, we have these agreements that we looked at, and that we, when we looked at each of the developments, we compared it to their development agreement. And of the 4 developments, I had said in my report, or in the letters that attached to the report, that none were in compliance. Since then, 1 has come into compliance, and that is Aurora. We had to look at them, Aurora, a little differently, because their residents that comply are on elderly waiver. An elderly waiver is a Medicare program, a Medicaid program. And so they have to income qualify in order to even get on Medicaid and elderly waiver. So we did not have access to all their income files, but we knew they were on Medicaid and that the state had gone through all the review process. So we accepted that. We accepted that since they qualified for elderly waiver, then they must be income qualified. And they, Aurora their attorneys wrote basically like an affidavit saying that the residents that qualified for elderly waiver were in fact occupying the units that had lower rents. So they made the connection. We weren't allowed to see all the documentation, but we got this affidavit from their attorney. So we have decided that Aurora does comply. The other 3 do not. With ARIA, they are charging the rents that are affordable rents, but they're also charging utilities on top of the affordable rents. So when the residents are paying rent plus utilities, the unit no longer becomes affordable. Then also with the ARIA, Avador, and Nolan Mains, the consultant was not able to get enough information where they could, with confidence and a surety, tell us that all the residents income qualified. And they said that, they believe that the intent by the owners and the property managers is that the residents all do, but they did not have enough verification or confirmation that that was in fact true. So they could not tell us that that was in fact true. So some files were very complete for the residents, and some were just lacking information to be able to tell us that. We're not writing them off. We're continuing to work with them to make sure that their files get up to a point where we can say with confidence that the residents, the tenants, are income qualified, because I don't believe it's anyone's intention to have a higher income person be able to live in an affordable unit. I don't believe that was the intent of the policy, and I don't believe that would be to anyone's satisfaction. So we do believe with the level of communication with the property managers that everyone has the goal of being compliant. They're just not there yet. I don't think there's anything evil or rebellious or defiant going on with them not being in compliance. I just think it's a matter of some training with the property managers that it's a very different process for approving tenants that are in affordable units than it is for market rate. In the early agreements, like I said, we're not prescriptive. They said, please have affordable units. And since we didn't have the policy guide to accompany them to tell them, like, okay, you have to look at student status. If they're a student, are they being covered and supported in entirety by their parents? And then what's their, so there's a lot of variables involved. And so our new agreements for these properties, they're a lot longer than they were in the beginning. And we also, as attachment, the policy guide, like this is what you need to do to make sure that you're renting, the rents are proper, and the residents are comply. And so that's it. And I know that there are some, the owners aren't happy to hear that they aren't in compliance, but there's just some work to do to get them to be there.
Questions
And I'm open to
questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Brindle?
Thank you. Stephanie, if with the earlier developments where the policy guide was not developed at the time, how does that policy guide now apply to them? And is there a line where, as of this date, this policy guide is in place and compliance is based on this 50-page policy guide? How does that apply? How does that get mandatorily applied to them?
Chair, commissioners, here is a crux of the issue. For example, Aurora, it was only a resolution. The resolution says 10% of your units must be affordable. That's all it said. However, in working with them, they have agreed that their affordability period starts November 17th, 2020. They have been open and operating for many years, but they have agreed, and this was something that they agreed, just because they said we want to do the right thing, that we will start the clock now. We are now in compliance. We start the clock now. We're going to have these units affordable for 15 years. It doesn't even say that in the resolution, but we'll have these units affordable for 15 years because that's the spirit of it at the time that they had the agreement, but we'll start it today. And so our compliance period is until 2035. Others are saying, you didn't have this in place. The agreement said that the affordability period starts at certificate of occupancy. So they didn't even have tenants living in their unit. And so, and they're holding to it. They're like, we got our certificate of occupancy in 2018. That's what our agreement said. We're not in compliance, but that's what our agreement said. So we're stopping at 15 years later. We don't really have any recourse to say, no, you're not in compliance. Your compliance period doesn't start until you are in compliance. So for those four, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. Moving forward, we're saying your compliance period will start when those units are in compliance, and we'll start the clock then. And then now we've changed it to 20 years. So 20 years will start when you have all your affordable units occupied by income eligible residents. And so that's what we have to deal with these four slightly differently than we are going to moving forward.
I think this is a really interesting conversation. And I will tell you that I got a call from Kelly Dorn. And I do think the development agreement is probably the controlling document. I think 4 of the 5 of us were on the council in that period of time when we were moving towards a policy, but didn't yet have a policy. So my recollection is that with respect to the old Best Buy site where Aria is now, Onyx, and then the Millennium across the street that's presently being built, because those properties were sold in the process of us developing an affordable housing policy and not having a policy in place, we thought may have affected the pricing on the land. We said, okay, we're just going to use the bully pulpit. And like the ARIA, for example, I think their obligation is 5%. And in the development agreement, and I haven't read it, I think it's probably vague language based on slide 7 as to what that means. What does income eligibility mean? Does it mean that you combine the rent plus the utilities plus the parking if they want underground parking? What does that mean? And so the argument of Doran companies is that we are in compliance. we have every affordable unit filled with somebody who is income qualified by their standards, by the standards they believed were in effect at the time the development agreement was executed with them. And if that development agreement is vague, I think it's unfair to characterize them as being non-compliant, because then the policy went into place after that. And I think, fortunately, we've hired Stephanie, who's going to lead us forward, and this is all going to be much clearer and less murky than it was when we started out. But I think, to her point, everybody has good intentions here, but I think we need to be careful how we tread on this issue with respect to those properties that were in that transition zone from us going from no affordable housing policy and using the bully pulpit to try to get a few units here and a few units there to actually having a policy in place. And that's squarely, to me, where I recall the ARIA falling. So I don't know what their development agreement says, but I think it's probably arguable that the language is somewhat vague, and they've got a perfectly legitimate position saying we're in compliance, and we're saying, well, gee, you really should be including utilities. We should be including utilities in the computation so that we can achieve true affordability. I just think it's an awkward situation. Director Neal. You're on mute.
Your recollection of those developments is one that we have as well, and that we're trying to move forward with. When you think back, you mentioned the bully pulpit was the way that we were trying to get affordable housing commitments from those developers. We feel like what we're doing today is part of that bully pulpit, right? The council asked for and got commitments from developers to provide affordable housing units. Our experience level at that time, from an administrative and regulatory standpoint, was not very developed. It just wasn't a very developed government at that time. And you're right, that's why Ms. Hawkinson and Affordable Housing Connections and other kind of step ups in level of sophistication of our regulatory capacity are here. We wanted to make sure that people kept those commitments. And so when we have some vagary in how we made those early commitments, we feel like we still want to get the most that we can from them, and we'll work with them as best that we can. But what we're trying to use is just some generally accepted principles in terms of definitions of terms of art and things like that. So that's where we are today. We wanted to make sure you knew that we think this is important, that commitments that you wanted and felt were important to make from a public standpoint at that time are still important today, and we're carrying them out as best we can.
Well, for me, the cautionary note is be careful about accusing somebody of being non-compliant when the agreement that they are required to uphold is vague as to what compliance means. And they were not subject to an affordable housing policy at the time because we didn't have one in place. And now we're trying to retroactively impose an affordable housing policy on a vague development agreement. So I think that's really something we got to be careful about on a going forward basis as we have developed more clarity around what income affordability means. I think it's terrific. I think it's clear, what people need to be doing. But I think we just need to be careful about criticizing people that are, they do have affordable units at the percentage requested, and they've got people in there that they deem to be income affordable based on the development agreement, their reading of it. I just think it's something we need to be cautious about. So,
I think going forward, it might be good to put an asterisk by Aria and the Millennium and Aurora and the other. I don't know if we need an asterisk by Avador. We had a policy when that went in.
Yep.
But I do recall when we were working with the developers of Millennium and Aria specifically, that they said, we know you're working on an affordable housing policy, and we would like to include affordable housing in our development. And that's when they voluntarily offered to do 5%. And we didn't have a policy at the time. So I think it might be good to treat them a little bit differently, just because we just don't have that agreement to the regulations in place. It's possible going forward to work with them and say, you know, this is where we are now. Here are the regulations. We understand where we all started, and see if we can bring them into the fold. But I do agree with the mayor. They agreed to do affordable before we had ourselves organized.
Well, and to me, then the development agreement controls, and if the development agreement is vague, then that's an issue that we have to take into consideration as to what income qualified means.
Right.
And I think that's the case with the ARIA.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Scott.
I mean, I don't want to drill into what the documents say, and, you know, I think it's, as a legal matter, I'm sure it's the documents, and the staff can work with these property owners to make sure there's compliance. But I will say, with respect to the amounts charged, the notion that utilities is not included in the cost that a renter bears is really not within the realm of what is a reasonable interpretation of charging. And so you know, if we're talking about bully pulpit here, I can't think of a property owner who's rented to people who would understand utilities to not be included in the charges that are figured for the affordability.
When I had the conversation with Mr. Doran, he told me that it was beyond utilities that they were computing in there. I mean, if somebody, you know, underground parking charges, and there were other things that they were saying had to be included in the computation of income qualified, so that all of these things would be available, not just utilities. So what position they'd take on utilities alone, I'm not sure. But
well, it's not the income qualified side of the ledger, it's the cost side of the ledger. You know, how much you're charging for rent needs to include all the things that somebody pays. And you can't kind of split that apart to try to evade the limits on the rent, regardless of whether somebody's income qualified or not.
Well, I guess it's a definition of what rent means. You know, in the context of that development agreement, what's the definition of rent?
Sure, and I get that there's going to be technical sparring on that issue, but, you know, within the affordable housing, you know, world, it's pretty clear that rent is really what you pay for the right to live there, and you can't split out extra stuff to try to evade that rent limit.
I'll go back to him and see what he thinks about the utility side of it. You know, because I still haven't seen the development agreement, and I don't know what the conversations were as the development agreement was developed. But you know, the point you're making is a fair one. That sometimes the difference between affordability and unaffordability for someone, regardless of their income, is whether they can pay the utilities on top of the rent.
Right, or other a la carte kind of, you know, charges for some kind of services that are really integral to, you know, you can't not pay your utilities, for instance. That it's not a choice whether you're going to have heat or light or the rest.
All right, other comments?
So what is the staff asking?
Chair, Commissioners, I'm not asking for anything. This is just a report to let you know the status of these first four. So I'm not, there's no request.
This is our first compliance reporting opportunity for the council. We just wanted you to know where we were with regards to past affordable housing commitments, that we're working on these, and that we think we're improving the way we're doing it every year from here on out.
I'll check with ARIA folks too on how they were looking at income qualified, because I think that is still relevant, because they may be looking at it in a way where they want to be able to have the person pay rent and utilities and be qualified from an income standpoint to be able to handle both. So let's find that out too. But I think the key is that we have developed a more sophisticated method of telling people what is part of the rent definition. So that's important. And it sounds like, it's these projects that were in that transition zone that we're having some conversations with as to whether they are or are not compliant.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Fisher.
So my observations of this information and this conversation is that, so we'll start with the good news. It'll only get easier from here with more clarity. But my take is that what staff are trying to do is, navigate in murky waters and try to get the most of what we're trying to get, which is affordable units out there for our residents. And, it's like trying to find that balance. And, so we're hearing a little bit of uncomfortableness from maybe some of the property owners, and that's maybe okay. That means that they're at least being pushed a little bit, challenged a little bit. And finding that fine line, as you're saying, Mr. Chair, is important, because we don't want to be accusatory, but yet we want to get as much of the affordability as we can with some agreements that maybe just clear. They're just not clear. So I appreciate the difficulty how difficult that is for staff to navigate, and sounds like they're hitting pretty close to the right amount. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for that update. Do you want us to receive this report, Ms. Hawkinson?
Yes.
Is there any pardon me?
Chair, Commissioners, yes, just receive the report.
Okay. Is there a motion to receive the report from the Affordable Housing Development Manager on the compliance?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, got a motion by Commissioner Brindle, second by Commissioner Anderson. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to the motion.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The report is received. Thank you, Ms. Hawkinson, for that update. And next we're on to correspondence. Anything that's come in that we need to be aware of? Executive Director Neal?
There is
Or Ms.
not.
Olson? Okay.
No, there is not.
All right.
This is Liz Olson. There were 3 correspondence forms attached in the packet that we've received since the last meeting.
All right. I think you noted that in the agenda.
Correct.
All right. Okay. HRA Commissioner comments? Okay. Sure.
Mr. Chair, just
Yes,
just perhaps a preview. We have a meeting next week. Is that right? On what day?
Thursday morning, I believe.
And the general topics on that meeting are
Grandview.
okay. Both the infrastructure as well as the old public works site.
Right.
Okay. Look forward to that conversation.
All right.
Maybe we could squeeze in another meeting before members Fisher and Brindle are. We can just meet every day after that, just to make sure we squeeze every last drop out of them before they're.
Christmas Day is wide open.
Yeah, I had this picture of sort of winding your way down to retirement, and this is like being on a jet fighter, and right at the end you just stop. You know, it's like, which is fine. Very exciting.
All right. Executive Director Neal, any comments?
None from me, thank you.
All right. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and second to adjourn. Brindle, then Fisher. Discussion. Roll call, please, with respect to adjournment.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. We stand adjourned, and we'll see you all next Tuesday, followed by next Thursday.